The first time I met Alyssa, she grinned like a lost freshman in a senior seminar. "Hi, you must be Noelle. I've heard so much about you," she chirped, extending her hand like we were already best friends. I shook it because I had to. HR had assigned me as her onboarding mentor. My manager's exact words were, "Just show her the ropes. She'll be shadowing you for a few weeks." But by the end of the month, it felt like I had handed her the whole damn blueprint. I'd been at the firm nearly 5 years, senior strategy consultant at Caldwell & Cross. One of the only black women on the floor. I had built my credibility from the ground up, surviving 3 rounds of layoffs, 2 restructures, and a dozen VP ego trips. So when the team started hinting that the new director of strategic partnerships would be picked internally, I knew I had a shot. Everyone knew I'd earned it, or at least I thought they did. Alyssa was fresh out of a name-brand MBA, bubbly, fast-talking, and always asking clarifying questions during meetings that somehow rephrased my ideas as hers. At first, I didn't mind. I gave her tips, showed her how we structure client pitches, let her observe my calls. I even forwarded her my template deck, color-coded slides, market segmentation data, the latest retail trend analysis I'd spent months developing. I thought I was being generous, strategic. She asked questions like a sponge, smiled wide, called me brilliant, then mirrored my every word in front of people who mattered. The first real red flag came at a Thursday meeting with Martin, our SVP. Alyssa had been invited just to sit in. I presented a new retail expansion model I'd been refining for weeks. When I finished, Martin nodded, then looked at Alyssa. "Alyssa, what would you say is the key differentiator here?" She didn't hesitate. "Well, if we apply Noelle's market elasticity data to Tier 3 vendors, I believe we can pre-negotiate lower sourcing costs and reinvest the margin into experiential storefronts. So we wouldn't just grow wide. We'd grow deep." Those were my words. Exactly my words. From my notes. From the lunch we'd had 3 days earlier. Martin smiled at her. Now that's forward thinking. By the time we left the room, Alyssa had 3 VPs telling her what a star she was. Me? I was told I'd be looped in later. I laughed about it with Marcy in HR that afternoon. She's just parroting, right? Like, nobody's seriously buying this act? Marcy gave a weak smile. Yeah, well, you know how leadership is with shiny new toys. Just be patient. Patient. Like I hadn't already been waiting for years. 2 weeks later, a calendar invite landed in my inbox. Final round presentations, strategic partnerships role. 3 internal candidates. 30 minutes each. Exec panel review. Alyssa was one of them, so was I. I stayed up late perfecting my pitch, tweaked my model, built a demo to showcase a pilot rollout. I had receipts, references, and a 5-year plan that showed scalable profit. I dressed in charcoal gray and gold, power colors. I walked in ready. But when Alyssa's name was called before mine, I sat frozen in my seat. She took the floor in, white, and slide by slide. She walked them through my model, color scheme, tagline, the segmentation map, the pivot to experience-based retail, even the demo idea, just with a different font and stock image. She didn't even flinch. I stared at the panel. No one blinked. No one said a thing. And when it was over, Martin stood up, clapping. Now that is exactly the kind of initiative we want leading strategic partnerships. She beamed, and for a second, she looked right at me, smiling. like she knew exactly what she'd done and knew I couldn't prove it. Yet, the applause faded, but the heat in my chest didn't. I didn't clap. I didn't smile. I just sat there, perfectly still, while my fingers gripped the edge of my folder until the corners bent. Alyssa walked past me as she left the conference room, her heels sharp on the tile, her perfume floating like she'd already won. She gave me a soft, tight-lipped nod, half pity, half triumph. The kind you give someone you've just stepped over. Martin didn't even glance my way. Just muttered something about next candidate and looked back at his phone. By the time I stood up to give my presentation, I already knew it didn't matter. I was the act they'd already seen, and they had decided the understudy made a better star. That night, I stayed late in the office. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat at my desk, lights dimmed, the open city glowing through the window like a silent jury. I pulled up both decks, mine and hers, opened them side by side, slide by slide, same headers, same charts. She'd even used my phrasing in the speaker notes, but I had nothing official. She hadn't emailed me asking for the content. We'd talked over lunch, shared a shared folder once, and I'd offered the rest out of what now looked like naive goodwill. I clicked open a new folder on my desktop, named it Quiet File. If they were going to pretend they didn't see it, I was going to make sure they couldn't ignore it later. The next week passed like a play with the ending already written. Alyssa's calendar filled up with new executive meetings. She started sitting in on calls I used to lead, and then came the final blow, an internal announcement email. We're thrilled to welcome Alyssa Brenner as our new Director of Strategic Partnerships. Her vision and energy represent the future of Caldwell and Cross. I stared at the screen. No mention of me. No thank you for my application. Just silence. Marcy from HR caught me in the break room later. Hey, I just wanted to say, I saw what happened. And it's not fair. You know it's not. I turned, eyes narrowed. Then why didn't you say anything? You were in the room. She lowered her voice. I've said too much already. You know how this place works. I held her gaze for a moment too long, then nodded once. I wasn't mad at Marcy. I was mad at the system that made people like her choose survival over truth. That night, I started pulling everything. Old project emails with timestamps, meeting invites where I'd walked Alyssa through models, screenshots of Slack messages, casual check-ins, her borrowing my language, even a photo of the paper napkin sketch she asked to keep from that lunch meeting, still saved in my gallery. But what I didn't expect was the internal drive. Apparently, Alyssa didn't know our cloud logs tracked document revision history. Her deck had been created 5 days after mine, but the data tables, metadata tagged to me. I grinned. And then, I called someone I hadn't spoken to in a year. Hello? Jess? It's Noelle. A pause. Then, whoa. Hey, it's been a minute. I need your help. I think I'm being plagiarized at work. You still doing corporate policy auditing? She exhaled. Girl, I'm doing more than that. I'm freelancing now. You want this private or loud? I smiled into the dark. Both. I wasn't going to shout. I was going to build something, stronger than noise. I was going to build proof. And when I was done, they were going to remember exactly who taught her everything she knew. Jess showed up to our lunch meeting in a denim jacket, black blazer, and the same firecracker smirk I remembered from our days in grad school. "Still rocking the killer instinct look, huh?" she said as she slid into the booth. I shrugged. Only way to survive corporate without getting eaten. We hadn't talked in months, not since she quit her in-house compliance role to go solo. But when she ordered her drink and pulled out a small leather notebook, I knew she hadn't lost. Her edge. "All right," Jess said. "Walk me through it. No edits, just facts." So I did. Every late night. Every stolen phrase. Every knowing smirk Alyssa gave me in the hallway. Every blind eye silence from Martin. And most importantly, the data trail, the metadata, the edits, the timestamps. Jess's pen flew across the page, then she paused. "You know what this smells like?" I looked up. "Patterned elevation," she said. "I've seen this before. It's not just that she stole your work, it's that they chose her to carry it. They wanted your ideas, but not you. That line sat with me for days. They wanted your ideas, but not you." Back at the office, Alyssa was glowing like a tech CEO on launch day. She had a new office, new assistant, a custom glass plaque on her door that read, "Director Strategic Partnerships," the title they said I was too internal for. Too serious for. Too something. I started watching more closely. Every time she was praised for being bold, it was something I'd once been criticized for. Being too direct, too opinionated, not deferential enough. She dressed in power suits I was once told were intimidating. She cut people off in meetings, and it was called commanding. She took my pitch, delivered it with a bubbly laugh, and got labeled visionary. It wasn't just Alyssa, it was what she represented. How palatable my voice became once it came out of someone else's mouth. That Friday, I asked Marcy to coffee. Off-site. She looked nervous before she even sat down. "I'm not trying to cause drama," I began carefully. "I'm trying to confirm something," Marcy blinked. "Okay. Has this happened before?" I asked. "Other women. Women of color. Having their ideas lifted, then bypassed." Her eyes dropped. She stirred her coffee. "Yes," she whispered. "But none of them ever had proof. Or, if they did, they didn't want to risk burning the bridge." She glanced around, voice tighter. "HR isn't neutral here, Noelle. We work for the company. You need to understand that." I nodded slowly. "I do." That night, Jess sent me a file she titled The Mirror Report. Inside was a fully documented audit, a side-by-side comparison of my original deck and Alyssa's, marked in red and yellow. Metadata extraction logs, showing timestamps and source file origins. An internal policy document from Caldwell and Cross about plagiarism, intellectual integrity, and credit in collaborative environments. And most damning of all, a chart of 5 previous women of color who'd worked in strategy roles, all of whom had left within a year of being passed over or undermined. The pattern was there. Jess included a final slide. Suggested strategy. Soft legal threat, plus controlled release. And just below that, but first, make them show you their hand. So I smiled on Monday, said hello to Alyssa like nothing happened, applauded her new vision initiatives, let her invite me to meetings, as her point person for legacy handovers. And when Martin asked me to write up notes from my last few client calls for Alyssa to own, I did. Every sentence I gave them now, marked, stored, logged, every email, BCC'd to the quiet file, Because when the confrontation came, and it would, they weren't just going to hear me, they were going to see everything. Monday bled into Tuesday like déjà vu. The meeting sounded the same, the players were the same, but the power dynamic had shifted. Now I was support. Now I was the one they turned to when Alyssa stumbled on terminology she didn't understand. Now I was the name no one mentioned, even though the work still bled from my fingertips. And that's exactly how I wanted it, for now. Because every time they underestimated me, they handed me another weapon. By the second week of Alyssa's tenure as director, she started slipping. She wasn't stupid, but she wasn't prepared. She delivered a quarterly forecast with inflated numbers she couldn't back up. She misquoted a vendor agreement, one I'd written, and when a senior client called her out for changing a deal structure midstream, she tried to pin it on legacy documentation confusion. I sat 3 seats down, silent, watching. Martin didn't look at me, but his clenched jaw told me he knew exactly where the original documentation had come from. They were realizing the truth. They'd built a ladder out of my back, but they'd placed the wrong person at the top. Later that week, I got an email from a junior associate named Farah. Subject line, "Can I ask something privately?" She was just 2 years in. Quiet. Sharp. One of the only other women of color on our floor. We met in the parking lot. She looked over her shoulder before speaking. "You trained her, right? Alyssa?" I nodded. She asked me for access to your old shared folders, said Martin authorized it. But when I looked, they were all empty. "Did you wipe them?" I blinked. "No, I archived them. She didn't have permissions to view them." Farah hesitated, then opened her phone. She showed me a screenshot, a message from Alyssa, timestamped just before the quarterly call. A request for Noelle's original segmentation files and vendor strategy draft. Farah whispered, "I didn't send it. I told her I couldn't find them." I smiled. "You did the right thing." And in that moment, I knew I wasn't alone. I met with Jess again, this time not for lunch, but in a law firm conference room she occasionally used. We laid everything out. The quiet file, the screenshots, the audit trail, Farah's message, my presentations, even a voice memo Alyssa had left me months ago, thanking me for letting her learn from the best. Jess tapped the desk. "They'll deny it at first, try to spin it as a collaborative environment, that she was part of your mentorship. That's why you need to give them the choice. Correct it, or watch it blow up." I stared at the table, jaw tight. "I don't want to burn it down," I said. "I want to own it." Jess nodded. "Then let them see what it looks like when the silent one stops being silent." I printed out the mirror report, highlighted the page that showed identical phrasing in our decks, slid it into a matte black folder, and scheduled a one-on-one with Martin. His assistant confirmed 3:30 p.m., Friday. Perfect. Right before the weekend. Right. Before word could spread. That morning, I dressed like power. Deep burgundy blazer, gold necklace, steady eyes. No smile. I walked in, greeted Martin calmly, and sat across from him like I belonged on that side of the desk. I didn't hand him the folder right away. I started with this. "I want to give you a chance to handle this internally. Respectfully. Quietly." Martin blinked. "Handle what, exactly?" Then I slid the folder across the table. Page 1. Her deck and mine, side by side. Page 2. File metadata with timestamps. Page 3. Policy clause on idea theft. Martin's eyes stopped, blinking. I trusted this company to recognize merit, I said. I gave you 5 years, and she gave you a smile. You chose the smile. He swallowed, jaw tight. This is serious. It is, I said. And I have more. But I'm giving you a chance to do the right thing before it becomes public. Or legal. His eyes darted to the folder, then back to me. I'll need time, he murmured. You have until Monday, as if she wanted the truth known, without having the courage to speak it. By Monday morning, the air at Caldwell and Cross felt thicker, tighter, like someone had pulled the cord on a chandelier, and now everyone was waiting for it to fall. Martin's office door stayed shut. His assistant avoided eye contact. Alyssa's laugh? Absent. In fact, she hadn't been seen on the floor all morning. I didn't ask questions. I didn't brag. I didn't even break my usual stride down the hall. Because when you've given people a deadline to do the right thing, the most powerful thing you can do is wait. At 11:17 a.m., an email arrived. Subject: Meeting request, HR follow-up. From Marcy Lawson. Time: 2 p.m., conference room. B.I. leaned back in my chair, exhaled, and clicked accept. The meeting room was cold, like they'd turned the thermostat down just to drain people's defenses. Marcy sat on one end of the table, professional but pale. Martin on the other, more rigid than usual, hands folded too tightly. There was another person in the room, too, some unfamiliar woman in a navy suit I recognized from compliance. Alyssa wasn't there. That was telling. Thanks for coming, Noelle, Marcy began carefully. We've reviewed the materials you provided. Very thorough documentation. Martin didn't speak. The compliance officer flipped through a folder. My folder. We've assessed the intellectual property policies outlined in our employee handbook, she said, and based on the evidence, it appears there were violations. Silence. Then she continued. As of this morning, Ms. Brenner has been placed on administrative leave, pending further investigation. I didn't move. I didn't blink. Because this wasn't the win. Not yet. This was them putting a bandage on a wound they still refused to admit they caused. Martin finally spoke. We understand your frustration. It's clear this process failed you. He cleared his throat. We'd like to offer a formal apology, and moving forward, we'd like to consider you for a leadership role in the strategic innovation team. It would include a title change, a salary adjustment, and the autonomy to build your own initiatives. Translation. They were giving me a new corner to stand in, a promotion disguised as hush money. I folded my hands. No. 3 sets of eyes snapped toward me. I'm not asking to be moved out of sight, I said, voice low but steady. I'm asking to be recognized. I want my original title proposal reinstated. Director of Strategic Partnerships. The one I earned. Not because someone failed, but because I delivered the work. Marcy opened her mouth, but I kept going, and I want it publicly acknowledged that my work was used without credit. A statement, internal and external. Martin's jaw twitched. That's unprecedented. I smiled. So was the theft. The room was quiet for a long moment. Then Martin leaned back and nodded, just once. We'll draw up the paperwork. That afternoon, the company Slack went eerily still. Then slowly, whispers started bubbling under safe usernames and private DMs. One read, "You see the email? Alyssa's out. Noelle's the new director. OMG. Another. Y'all remember when they said she was too intense? Funny how that intensity built the whole department. And one from Farah, quietly sent to me. Thank you for fighting. For all of us. But Alyssa still hadn't said a word. She hadn't reached out. No apology, no denial, no explanation. Until the end of the day, when I returned to my desk and found a single envelope. No name. Just a sticky note. You win. Inside, a flash drive, and a post-it with 3 words, check slide 7. I plugged it in with trembling fingers. It was a backup of her presentation, the final one she'd given to the panel. But this version? Slide 7 had hidden notes, text tucked behind a graphic. When I dragged the graphic aside, a sentence appeared. Credit to Noelle Williams. This was originally her model and idea. I stared, so she knew. She knew all along. She hadn't just stolen it. She'd documented it, but she'd buried the credit behind an image. Slide 7 haunted me, not just because it proved Alyssa knew what she'd done, but because she'd hidden it, like a digital confession sealed behind a smile. I stared at that sentence. Credit to Noelle Williams. This was originally her model and idea. Over and over until the words lost shape. That was all I ever wanted. Recognition, acknowledgement, proof that I wasn't imagining the theft. But now, holding it, something inside me twisted, because it wasn't enough. Not anymore. The next morning I printed the slide and walked it straight to Jess. She scanned it once, twice, then raised an eyebrow. She buried it on purpose, she said flatly. This wasn't an oversight. This was legal insulation. If someone ever accused her of plagiarism, she'd have technically credited you, just hidden. I nodded. Coward's credit. Jess leaned back. So what are you thinking? I looked at the printout, then at her. I'm thinking it's time to rewrite more than a title. Back at the office, they'd updated my email signature. Director of Strategic Partnerships. Black and bold beneath my name. It felt earned. But it didn't feel done. I called a meeting with Martin, and Marcy, closed door, no smiles. I want to implement a new protocol, I said. Every major internal pitch must include an authorship log. Who created it? Who contributed? Who presented it? Martin raised a brow. That's not standard policy. It will. Be now, I replied, because I'm not the only one this has happened to. I'm just the first who brought the receipts. I let that sink in. Also, I added, I'd like to formally mentor junior analysts again, but this time, with authorship protections in place. What happened to me will not happen to anyone under my wing. By Friday, it was official. An internal memo went out across all departments. In light of recent internal reviews, Caldwell and Cross will be implementing authorship accountability measures across all strategic departments, effective immediately. The next line made my breath catch. This policy initiative was led by Director Noelle Williams, whose leadership continues to shape our ethical standards and innovation culture. There it was, my name, on a policy, on a principle. They tried to erase me. Now they had to cite me. At 6:12 p.m., I got a message on LinkedIn from Alyssa. I'm sorry. That was it. 2 words, no context, no detail, but enough to keep me frozen for a beat. I didn't reply. Instead, I forwarded the message to Jess with the caption, "She finally said it." Jess just sent back a thumbs up and a line I'll never forget. Let her sit in the silence she gave you. But the silence didn't last long. 2 weeks later, a LinkedIn update rolled across everyone's feed. Alyssa Brenner, consultant, currently seeking new opportunities. The comments were mostly corporate fluff. Wishing you the best. You'll land somewhere amazing. But one caught my eye. Sometimes talent isn't enough if you're building with stolen bricks. Farah, my intern turned analyst, now leading her own small client team. I smiled. She wasn't afraid to speak anymore. None of them were. That Friday, I led my first team-wide meeting as director. Before I spoke, I pulled up a slide. Not a chart, not a model, just a single quote. If they bury your credit, dig until they're the ones exposed. The team sat in silence, eyes locked. Then, applause. Not polite, not mandatory, but real. The kind that said, "We see you now, and we know what it costs to be seen." I didn't expect the email from the C-suite. Subject line, request, coffee chat with EVP, corporate strategy. It came directly from Vanessa Cole, executive vice president, top brass, the kind of woman whose name carried weight in rooms. Most of us never even entered. Her assistant wrote, "Ms. Cole has been following the recent developments regarding the authorship policy initiative and your leadership. She'd like to schedule 30 minutes to discuss the future of strategy innovation at Caldwell and Cross." The future. Suddenly, I was the conversation, not the shadow in the room. We met at a private lounge on the 36th floor, somewhere I'd never been invited before. Vanessa was poised, early 50s, tall silver braids pulled into a knot, diamond-cut focus in her eyes. She didn't bother with small talk. "I watched everything," she said plainly. From the first whisper to the final. "Policy rollout." I stayed quiet. She leaned forward. "What you did took guts. You went up against a structure built to protect itself. And you didn't just fight. You rewrote it." I tilted my head. "I didn't come to burn the building down." "No," she said. "You rewired the lights." Vanessa took a slow sip of her espresso, then set it down. "I'm not offering you a pat on the back," she said. "I'm offering you a seat at a table that rarely opens." I blinked. "Meaning?" "We're launching a new vertical, diversity-driven innovation, strategy. I want you on the founding team, not as a face, as a force." I stared at her, pulse steady. "Full creative control?" I asked. She smiled faintly. "Within reason." "And freedom to hire?" "3 direct reports to start." I folded my hands, letting the offer sink in. Not a favor, not an apology, an acknowledgement. After the meeting, I stood alone at the glass window of the 36th floor, watching the city roll beneath me. Below, on the 11th floor, my old team would be in another status meeting, reviewing slide decks, checking KPIs, sipping bad coffee in paper cups. But I wasn't in that room anymore, because I built the room I stood in now, and I wasn't about to let anyone else decorate it with their name on my blueprint again. That night, I messaged Farah and 2 others I trusted, Samira from UX, DeAndre from Vendor Ops, sharp, undercredited, unafraid. I wrote, "Starting something new, from scratch. I want builders, not performers. You in?" 3 typing dots. Then, "Hell yes." Finally, "Say less." The next morning, Alyssa's name popped up on LinkedIn again. She'd started a consultancy, Bridging innovation plus strategy for the modern retail age. Her tagline? Vision you can trust. I almost laughed. Because while she was repackaging borrowed brilliance into buzzwords, I was doing something better. Building something no one could steal. 6 months later, the room didn't look the same. It was sleeker, sharper. The new wing of Caldwell and Cross shimmered with cold glass and clean steel lines. But the real power didn't come from the decor. It came from the 5 chairs at the head of the table, 3 of which now answered to me. My team, Farah, Samira, and Dondre, sat with heads high. No more whispering in parking lots. No more hiding in shadows. They wore tailored suits and bold colors, claimed their space without apology. I watched them lead a strategy meeting with 3 VPs, presenting a bold pivot proposal to restructure our retail partners around underserved markets. Every chart they presented had source links. Every idea had attribution. Every voice was heard. Because I made sure of it. After the meeting, Vanessa Cole pulled me aside. "They're watching," she said, a half smile playing at her lips. "The board. They've noticed the numbers and the culture shift. And I think it's time we talk next steps." I nodded. "Promotion?" She shook her head. "Succession." The word landed like a drumbeat in my chest. Later that night, as the office emptied, I sat alone in the glass-walled corner that once belonged to someone else. I opened an old file, quiet file, the screenshots, the buried credits, the Slack messages and slide decks. Still there. Not because I needed revenge anymore, but because it reminded me what I had survived and how close they came to silencing me. Alyssa never returned to the company. Her consultancy fizzled within months. The last I heard, she was freelancing, under a new name. Rebranding, because that's what happens when you build your empire out of someone else's foundation. It always crumbles. Farah brought me a coffee the next morning. Smiling, confident. "Our numbers just cleared the quarterly target. We're over by 18%. I smiled back. "Let's make it 25 next quarter." She laughed, already building the deck, and this time her name would be at the top. Before I left that evening, I slipped something into the shared resource drive, a simple document, authorship credit and strategy ownership, internal pledge. It wasn't mandatory, but within a week, 50 employees signed it, not for fear, but because the culture had changed. And so had the leaders. They tried to bury me, tried to dress my voice in someone else's smile. But I dug deeper, built louder, and when they finally opened the door, I walked in, sat down, and wrote my own name on the plaque. Noelle Williams, Executive Director, Strategic Innovation, Caldwell and Cross, and this time, they had no choice but to say it out loud.